Okay, now let's talk about the anatomy of the torso from the back. Let's start off with our landmarks, the first of which is the mastoid process. So that's going to be little bumps right behind the ears, here and here, your mastoid process. We talked about them because they're responsible for the origin point of the sternocleidomastoideus. That's number one. Number two, we have the vertebra prominence. That's this little bump right here. Sometimes it's also called the seventh cervical. The seventh cervical. That bump separates the cervical portion of the spine with the costal portion of the spine belonging to the rib cage. So it's an important indicator of where our rib cage starts, the vertebrae prominence. That's going to be number two. Another point that we talked about already from the front, the acromion process. That's going to be these two little bumps right here. That's where the spine of the scapula, which we're going to talk about in a second, meets the collarbones, meets the clavicles. So those two systems are actually connected and they work independently from the rib cage, the acromion process. That's going to be number three. Then we have the scapula itself. So the scapula are these shapes right here, the scapula. What can I say about them? Well, notice that they start slightly below the seventh cervical, and then they run down to the seventh rib, so the costal portion of the rib. So slightly past our halfway point on the rib cage. And then normally the separation between them is about 1 neck wide. Another important landmark on the scapula is called the scapular spine. So that's going to be these shapes right here. They're the origin point of lots of muscles, ending points of lots of muscles. That's an important landmark and one that you can often see either through a bump or a depression, depending on the muscular development of the model. So that's the scapula. Another really important landmark is called the median furrow. That is the division running straight down the spine this way, the median furrow. That's going to be number 5. Then we have the sacrum. The sacrum is a bony plate right here where the last few vertebrae fuse together and form a triangle. Another very important landmark, which I think we've already talked about because it allows you to figure out exactly what the tilted rotation is of the hips, the sacrum, number 6. And then lastly, we have the posterior iliac crest. So we had the anterior iliac crest before. The posterior forms this kind of McDonald's arch M's on either side. That's where you have your obliquus externus muscles running this way and this way, like this. Okay, so those are the landmarks. Now let's take a look at the muscle groups. Posterior iliac crest. Okay, the anatomy of the back is rather complicated because we have a series of muscles going from deep muscles to superficial muscles that are responsible for the surface, the outer appearance of what we're seeing. Whereas from the front, there's lots of very big, easy to recognize muscles that everyone sort of has an instinct for. The pecs, the abs, the deltoids. From the back, things are a little bit more subtle, and plus you have the added complication of an independently moving scapula, which definitely changes what you're looking at considerably depending on whether the arm is tilted down, tilted forward, or pulled back. Okay, so let's start off with our first very, very big muscle, your erector spinae muscles. These are muscles that start at the occipital, the base of the skull. Let's switch to this. Okay, so they start at the base of the skull, and there's a large number of them, but basically they all run down along either side of our spinal column, our median furrow, and attach themselves to the sacrum. Again, there's quite a number of different muscles, the spinalis, the iliocostalis, the longissimus dorsi, but you can all fuse them all together into a single muscle group. The erector spinae, the strengtheners, the straighteners of the spine. the erector spinae. So that's going to be muscle A. Let's do this for the sake of clarity. Okay. Then we have a muscle called the rhomboideus, probably named after the shape rhomboid, which starts at the vertebrae prominence and attaches itself all the way along the inside of the scapula, and then attaches to the fifth rib in the costal region of the spine. So right about there, right at the midpoint of the scapula. This is a muscle that is responsible for pulling your shoulder blades back, and mostly visible when the shoulders are in tension. Let's say you're rowing something, you're pulling something back. That's the rhomboideus muscle. Let's label it this way, the rhomboideus. Okay, now we also have muscles on the opposite side of the scapula running all the way here and attaching to the bottom 8 ribs, like this. Those are your serratus anterior muscles. So we saw the 4 digits of the serratus anterior from the front. They originate on the outer part of the scapula and are responsible for pulling your scapula forward, pulling your shoulders forward. Those are the serratus anterior muscles. That'll be C. Okay, so we have rhomboideus pulling the shoulders back. We have the opposite compensatory muscles, the serratus anterior, pulling the shoulder blades forward. And then we have 4 muscles that sit on the shoulder blade itself. The first muscle is the supraspinatus. Supra means above, and spinatus means spine. So we have the scapular spine. We have a muscle that starts above the scapular spine, and there's a little hole through the scapular spine here, and the attachment point is to the back of the humerus, the upper bone of the arm. That's the supraspinatus. Just below it, you have the infraspinatus. That's a muscle that sits on the shoulder blade underneath the scapular spine and attaches more or less to the same spot as the supraspinatus. Then just below it, you have another muscle, which is called the teres minor. All these muscles are approximately the same size, and they occupy the upper half of the scapula. And they all attach at the same point. Below the teres minor, you have the teres major, which is a large muscle that sits on the bottom half of the scapula that goes instead to the back here. It reaches to the front of the humerus and attaches in front like this. So we have the teres major muscle right here. Teres major, that would be G, right? Let's see, the teres minor will be F. Okay, hopefully you guys, this is clear for you guys. Though, look, anatomy can be confusing, just inherently. Okay, these 4 muscles form your rotator cuff. So if you're having shoulder pain, shoulder problems, chances are by exercising these 4 muscles, you can actually prevent shoulder surgery. You can stabilize your shoulder socket. Okay, let's keep working. Okay, so on top of all of these muscles, you have the deltoid. So the deltoid is going to sit on top. I'll draw it here, but I'm also going to draw it on this side. It's going to sit all the way along the scapular spine here, like this. So this is sitting on top in front of your infraspinatus, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major, the deltoid. And it's going to attach right here. So slightly above the base of the scapula at about the halfway point, which is about approximately the nipple line. So let's put our deltoid here as well for the sake of clarity. Here's your deltoid muscle. Deltoideus is going to be H, and H. Okay, 2 more muscles, actually 4, 4 more muscles to deal with. Let's talk about the latissimus dorsi. Latissimus dorsi is a very, very big muscle. It's going to start one vertebrae down below the rhomboideus here. Then it's going to sweep down a little bit, overlap. Let's see if I can change the color just a little bit, maybe to show that it's in front. It's going to start overlapping your scapula a little bit in the bottom. And then it's going to attach at about the same point as the teres major. So at this point here in front, like this. Then it swoops down. Okay, I'm going outside my figure a little bit. Let's see if I can not do that. Okay, it swoops down like this. And then starts overlapping the erector spinae here and attaching to the sacrum. So let's do the same thing here. It's going to swoop down and up like this. The latissimus dorsi muscle. Now, here it tends to be pretty thick. It's going to help you with your pull-ups quite a lot. However, here it turns to something called an aponeurosis, meaning a sheath. So anytime you hear the anatomical term aponeurosis, that means that the muscle basically has no bulge in that part. It's just an attachment point. So, latissimus dorsi has two parts. It has the bulging part on the bottom half of the rib cage, and then it has the aponeurosis part. I can write aponeurosis. Aponeurosis with latissimus dorsi. Okay, we have two more muscles to go. The one we've already talked about when we're dealing with the torso from the front. That's going to be your trapezius muscle. Trapezius starts at the occipital bone here, attaches all the way to the scapular spine here, like this. So here's your latissimus, your trapezius muscle here, and then works its way down to all the way down to the first 10 vertebrae. So the end of the trapezius is going to be somewhere right about here, like this. That's going to be your trapezius muscle, J. And this is something you can see from the front, right? It forms the tops of the shoulders from the front of the torso. All right, then we have the same muscle we talked about for the front, your external obliques. Let me change the color here. They're going to start at the bottom 8 ribs, so slightly above the halfway point here. They interweave with the serratus muscles. Up. Let's not do that. And attach to the iliac crest here. So here are your external obliques. They're visible from the front, the back, the side, absolutely every angle possible. Your external obliques. Okay, that covers all the muscles except for a muscle that we talked about already from the front, the sternocleidomastoideus. We see it from the back as well. So that's going to originate here, like this, and run its way to the front, attaching to the clavicle and the sternum, the sternocleidomastoid, which I guess we can write right here. So KL, L will be the sternocleidomastoid. Okay, now, as I said, there's an added complication in that the shoulder blade moves freely from the rib cage. In fact, the only attachment point the shoulder system, the shoulder girdle, as it's called, has to the rib cage is at the clavicle in front. So let's talk very briefly about what happens to the shoulders, to the scapula, when we have arm movement. So you can see in diagram A that when the arm is facing straight down, the shoulder blade faces the same direction. So the angle of the shoulder blade and the angle of the arm are parallel to each other. And this continues happening when the arm starts lifting and goes up to shoulder level. So here the arm is lifted shoulder high. The shoulder blade does not engage. It's going to stay facing downward. Now, the action starts happening when you start lifting your shoulder above shoulder level. We have the scapular spine here. You guys can see it right here. Here's the scapular spine. The head of the humerus, the upper bone, gets locked here like this and forces your scapula to start rotating with it. So, below shoulder level, if the arm is below shoulder level, the scapula faces down. Once you start going anywhere above shoulder level, the scapula is going to be at a right angle to the arm. So you can see here the arm is lifted considerably above shoulder level. You can see that the angle of the scapula is going this way, which is at pretty much a right angle to the angle of the arm. Now, two things happen when the scapula starts getting engaged. We start getting rotation this way, like this, and also the scapula starts moving around. It starts moving closer and closer to the sides of the body. So normally when I start my drawing, let's change color, I simplify the shape of the scapula and the shoulder by doing this. So this is my construction for the back. I draw a triangle, and then I draw a little egg shape attached to it like this. So if I draw a rib cage, I'm going to do this. I indicate the rotation this way, and then I'm going to start sketching in the really simple triangle of the scapula, which I know is about one neck apart, and then runs slightly past my halfway point here, like this. There's my construction. And then, because the shape is so close to what's actually there, I can start putting my muscles down right on top of it. It helps me establish what's actually going on in this system. Okay, so something just to keep in mind. Right, arm facing down, scapula faces down. Arm facing side to side, below shoulder level, scapula still faces down. Arm above shoulder level, scapula starts following the angle of the arm and then moving away from the median furrow, moving away from the middle of the spine. Okay, so that covers very briefly, very generally, the anatomy of the back. Now, once again, let's talk about what happens when we see this in actual observation and how to deal with it.